Hey, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. That time of week, we are doing the MLB Power Rankings. We're a couple of days into May now. I think it's about 6 weeks into the season. I think this is the sixth power ranking of the season. So things are starting to get figured out. I think the bottom row is really starting to get figured out, at least the bottom five teams. The top row, you're starting to figure out who the top teams across the MLB are. For me, these three middle rows have been super difficult to track and follow over the season, and just trying to figure out who is better than who is a little bit difficult, but I'm going to try and do it in this video. Of course, we're going to go through all 30 teams, try to be a little quick, starting a little bit early. The Washington Nationals game is in the ninth against Cincinnati. They're up 4-2, I think. And of course, we do this before the Sunday nighter, Dodgers Atlanta, about to kick that off. That game's just about to start. As well, St. Louis and the Mets are in the second game of their doubleheader with the Mets with a couple run lead as well. So those things shouldn't really matter on this board. And of course, I always tend to start at the same time, but probably about half an hour, 1 hour earlier than usual. Game 7 of the Jets and Blues tonight, so gotta check that out. But number 30, guys, before we jump into it, if you are new, subscribe to the channel. We are about to cross over 1,500. I feel like I've been asking week after week. We're so close to it. I just surprised that it slowed down a little bit, but understood. I haven't made as much content as usual. We did make an extra video this week going over my bias, ranking my teams 1 through 30. So if you think I'm a little bit biased in this video, check that out, and maybe you are correct. But so number 30, they've been last now since the second week of the season. I don't think a lot has changed. The one thing that has changed for them, they did have a win streak going this week. 2 games in a row, they had a 2-game win streak. They went 1-2 against Atlanta, 1-3 against the Giants. A little bit of a crossover with their win with the Giants and the win with Atlanta. Did create a win streak. So we had a win streak for the Rockies. They're up to 6 wins on the season, and that's pretty much it. That's all I'm going to say. Number 29, making an argument. They're trying to make a push. I think they're trying to make a push outside of these bottom 2 rows. Beginning of the year, I was like, the White Sox are going to be last all season long. Might set a record, but usually I'm pretty wrong when those things happen, and they're making a push, in my opinion. They do win a series this week against Houston over the weekend. A team that Houston seems to drop down to their competition. I'll touch on that a little bit more. But then they lose earlier in the week to Milwaukee, 2-1. So overall, 500 week, but when you're in the bottom 2 on this board, you're definitely setting yourself away from Colorado because you have 3 wins, which is more than Colorado, I think, has had in 3 weeks. So number 28, a team that I think the White Sox are making a contender about, and especially now that Mike Trout seems to be going down again with some sort of knee contusion, something like that. Didn't really look too much into it. I just saw he wasn't in the lineup today. And the Angels have looked pretty atrocious after that hot start. We were having some people think that maybe they're for real. I never really got involved with that situation. 1-3 against Detroit, 0-2 against Seattle. 2 top teams on this board, so to go 1-5, I guess not too disappointing, but overall they seem to be giving up a ton of runs, and offense isn't necessarily there for themselves. Pitching has been an issue for this Angels team for a number of years, and I think they're definitely clearly the worst team in this division, which I think the Athletics are celebrating about. Number 27, I have the Pittsburgh Pirates. They've almost cemented themselves in this bottom row, and this week was like no different. A 1-5 week overall, 1-2 against the Cubs, 0-3 against the Padres. So much like the Angels, they had matchups against top teams on this board, and Pittsburgh just seems to be giving up runs, lots and lots of runs. The pitching is not there. The offense is not consistent, not scoring runs themselves. The only bright spot that we're going to pretty much see this season, I think, from the Pirates seems to be Skeens. Who knows? Maybe they're going to sell him off, but that'd be just absolutely crazy, right? Next up, number 26, falling back to the bottom row and maybe finding some permanency going to be in this bottom row now. The Marlins, they looked a little exciting at the start. We saw them fighting off some teams, beating some teams in series like the Pirates early, had me thinking maybe they were a little bit better than they are, but turns out the Pirates were just a lot worse than I thought, and that kind of story holds a little bit true. There are some bright futures on this team. Sauer seems to be having a pretty killer season. Miami so far this week, another 1-5 team. So as you can see the consistency here. Just going back, the White Sox potentially have some room to move if they put up these wins like they did this week. They had the best record in this bottom row this week after being, so just that. 0-3 against the Dodgers and 1-2 over the weekend here as well. Against the Athletics. So Miami kind of fitting their bill here. Taking out the final spot in the bottom row, I do have the Washington Nationals, and for me on this, they're kind of a little bit ahead of the rest of these five. They've at least performed in ways that you have something to be excited about. The offense at times has been pretty electric. We saw it even today and this weekend. They had a pretty good weekend going 2-1 against Cincinnati. One of the teams that is hot and cold to themselves, I guess, as well. The pitching, on the other hand, for Washington has its hit and misses. We're seeing Mackenzie Gore have another pretty good outing this week, as well as some other guys on this team. But at the same time, we do have the other side of it where they tend to give up a lot of runs, especially in this bullpen, getting absolutely demolished in the fourth game that was on Monday this week against the Mets. I think they gave up 19 runs there, and then they go 1-2 against Philly. So I'm not trying to get ahead of myself. Like, this team is not going to make a fight for the division. But at the same time, they can play a little bit of spoiler because we got some central teams that are going to be looking to pick up some wins against the weaker opponents potentially here, and especially on the American League side. So they're going to be playing every team in the American League. We've seen them play a couple of them tough already. So they are going to have a lot of chances to play spoiler. Number 24. I think they're in the same spot. I might have even moved them up one spot and probably didn't need to, but they did pick up a series win this weekend against Boston. Boston's a whole nother story. We'll get to it in a second. 1-3 against Cleveland, kind of setting the stage here for what I've kind of decided Minnesota is struggling. And if it wasn't for the White Sox series last week, I could be talking about Minnesota being the worst team in this division, but they at least took that last week. Minnesota picked up another series win here. So they got two. They were winning half and half in the past 2 weeks, maybe trying to make a push. We're seeing some flourishing, at least turning maybe a corner. So they're back into the second bottom row, which means at this point in the season, 10th is only a 12-game win streak away, right? Like, if you start going on a win streak and we start seeing some good signs from the rest of your team, they are there. It's there. We see it sometimes. Minnesota, they won some really close ones this week. So something to look forward to. Number 23. I felt kind of bad putting St. Louis in this position because they go 2-1 against Cincinnati, and then they're 1-1 against the Mets, potentially losing this one. So a 500 week. We've seen St. Louis play pretty competitively and at times beating a lot of the top teams. If I had to just go with my gut on what's going on with St. Louis, I think they've had one of the tougher schedules. They're a couple games under 500. But what's playing in it for me is when I start matching them up on 5-game sets against the teams ahead of them, I don't think they have it to get there. I don't think they really have the talent this year to make it to a playoff run. So that's kind of dragging them down when we're talking about the next couple of rows. St. Louis, on the other hand, they've been competitive, and going 2-1 against Cincinnati is no slouch of a thing. So we got to keep that in mind. St. Louis, if they do keep trugging along here, they might inch their way up. I don't really see them getting past middle of the board this season. Next up, I think in the same exact spot as last week, I do have the Baltimore Orioles. We saw some signs of life this week, which is much needed to kind of prevent the free fall that we have been seeing. They do beat the Yankees in a 2-1 series, which is something to get excited about, but then they fall back to the team that seems to have their number now, dating back to last year's playoff, the Kansas City Royals. They go 1-2 there. And a team that they used to match up with fairly well. It just seems like this team has moments where the pitching just absolutely lets them down. And I think today was no question about it. That was the case. The bullpen blowing another lead. They had a lead a couple times here and blew it. And today in the rubber match against Kansas City. So just things like that. The hitting just not being able to hit lefties whatsoever. And some of the guys that you thought were going to make this team flourish, and we saw it in the year and a half leading up to now, just not coming together. One of the biggest fallers of the week, I do have the Milwaukee Brewers. I'm not 100% sure where they were last week. I might have had them at 9. I know I talked about having them hold on to that position. Maybe I was being optimistic. I think the rest of it came to fruition here. Going 1-2 against the Cubs. They did shut them out 4-0 today, salvaging what could have been a disastrous series. Going 2-1 against the White Sox. So against both Chicago teams, they go 500. But I think just some of the things you see this week, not being able to score some runs in some pretty key situations, giving up a ton of runs. We're starting to see signs of what we saw early in the season starting to show up again. That might be more of a pattern than what I had thought maybe it wasn't. So I'm starting to lean in and thinking that it might be more of a pattern. Milwaukee has some work to do amongst with some other teams. Number 20. Every time, I swear, I move this team up the board, they go on like this kind of run that is just terrible. And then I move them down the board, and sure enough, they're going to go on a winning streak of some sort. So don't be surprised if that happens. Toronto, even though they're my favorite team and I tend to watch most of the games more closely than the rest of this board, just can't seem to figure them out. 2-1 against Boston, 1-2 against Cleveland. Realistically, those series should have been switched. Like, they should have beat Cleveland and they should have lost to Boston. They had a massive comeback in one of the Boston games. They had a massive collapse in one of the Cleveland games. So, it's hard to figure out this team. Some days the pitching has been good. The bullpen is not consistent whatsoever. And most days it's a little scary, to be honest. And the offense just doesn't seem to get going. It doesn't help that appears like the bottom half of this order, kind of AAA kind of players rotating around there. So might not have what it takes to get into the playoff race right now. There are a few games under 500, and it might be that sticking that way because the rest of this board, they're ahead. Number 19, sticking in the American League East. Coming into the year, I thought this division would be a little bit stronger. Turns out to me, American League East as a whole is starting to possibly be overall an average division. Tampa Bay had a pretty interesting week. However, they went 0-3 against Kansas City, so just getting swept by them. So the Royals will get to them, but they had a good week against the AL East. And then they beat the Yankees. So it's just like, what's going on? This Tampa Bay seems to be able to pitch the Yankees very well, and it showed up this week. Wasn't going to give a whole lot of credit for just the one series. I'm interested, as you can see here, I'm setting up a Tampa Bay, Toronto. We haven't seen them really play each other yet this year. And right now, I think those guys are going to be battling along with Baltimore. We've seen Baltimore play Toronto, though. Number 18, just sticking in the American League East is interesting. They are a 500 team. I was digging into it, looking at some records and stuff. But I just didn't feel like they were good on this board because I always set up the power rankings, and whenever I do a new video, I kind of clear the board during the weekend. I have a chance to kind of realign with what I'm thinking. Now, I had Boston pretty low, and then I was like, oh, they're 500. Maybe I should think about moving them up. So I did a little bit deeper dive and realized they had 6 games already against the White Sox. Their schedule wasn't super great. I've actually seen them play 7 games really closely when they were playing Toronto, and they lost both those series, and they were not pretty games for Boston. Overall, Boston has not had a pretty season. The offense started very cold. Devers started super cold. Durant started super cold. The pitching was not anything great to write home about. So overall, Boston, I have a lot of concerns, and that's kind of why I have them at number 18 right now. 1-2 against Toronto, 1-2 against Minnesota. Even though they've lost both series to Toronto, I still think overall they're a better team. They should be up a little bit more on this board. But a bad week, 2-4 for Boston. If they keep doing that kind of thing, and as they play the better teams across the board here, you can see them swapping down into this row. So keep that in mind. Next up, Texas Rangers, number 17. I talked about this team last week pretty heavily about how important this week was going to be. They had back-to-back series in their division and did not go well. They lost both series, going 1-3 against the Athletics. Get to that in a moment. And then 1-2 against Seattle. So they salvaged today with an 8-1 win, I believe, against Seattle, almost to avoid the sweep. But before that, they were getting pretty demolished by Seattle. And the offense has been super suspect for Texas. Coming into this season, you didn't really think the offense was going to be the issue for Texas, but it definitely has been. And if it doesn't start to heat up, they're going to be far out of this playoffs because we got teams like number 16 just moving on and making a big charge. Arguably, people could argue that they could be higher up on this board. A lot of new faces on this team, a lot of young guys, a lot of new talent, a lot of new names that I'm just starting to get used to. I'm sure a lot of you guys are if you aren't following them too closely. But the Athletics came in and had a pretty great week. 3-1 against Texas. I already talked about that. Some good, solid wins there. Followed it up with a nice series win against the Miami Marlins. So that's why I like to see from teams that are trying to move up this board. Have a solid week. Have a good series against a top division team like they did in Texas. And then followed up. Don't fall flat when you play the weaker opponents as well. So the Athletics pulling that off. Super excited right now. I think if you started the playoffs today, they potentially would be in that spot. Number 15, I do have the Cincinnati Reds. This team has been super hard to put on this board. When you just look at the overall standings, they're above 500. Their run differential is one of the better ones in the league. When you start looking at some of the wins they've had some pretty blowout wins, and it's the pitching that really starts to do it. But then you see a lot of the closer games too. They're very close and they're just not getting it done. So it's a team that's been very hard to put my finger on, and this week did not help whatsoever. 1-2 against St. Louis, 1-2 against Washington. So overall 2-4 week against two teams that have ranked lower here. While I think I even moved them up on the board, that is a very rare situation. Just going in depth, it might be a little bit of an adjustment from what prior weeks and just other teams coming, mostly the AL East, just not performing the way I thought they would. Next up, I have the Atlanta Braves, and this team started super cold. April was awful. 2-1 against Colorado, 0-2 against the Dodgers so far. So 2-3 week. I think they're starting to come into it. This seems to happen every year with a team that they have a slow start, and then I try to get ahead of it a little bit in this situation, trying to project where this team is going. I do think they are a very competitive ball club. We did see them lose to a couple of these teams early on in the year, but injuries were at play. Just coldness sometimes at play in baseball, and their schedule has been super difficult to get things started. When Acuna comes back, will it give it a big boost? I think so. This offense is there to perform, but only time will tell. I can't keep them up on hopium, but right now I'm going to give them another week trying to figure them out, because playing the Dodgers is always a tough task. You can't hold too much against the team when they're there. Number 13, got them moving up a few spots. Obviously got to see them a lot closer playing Toronto this week. Felt like a little bit of a miracle win, but the bullpen, I have to tip my cap to them. Bullpen delivered some solid wins for them this week, the past two games. As well as their starters did pretty decent, so I had to give a lot of credit there. Kwan is just an animal watching him play, and the other guy, Schmeeman, or getting that wrong, but 3-1 against Minnesota, 2-1 against Toronto. So giving them credit, they're on the bubble now in the playoff picture. I think if you looked at the overall standings overall, they might be in that spot right now. But to be in the playoffs in the American League this year, you got to win the middling matchups, which they did against Toronto. They beat up Minnesota. I love to see it right now. Cleveland is starting to turn my opinion a little bit here. Next up, Houston. Houston is a interesting case. Now they're performing a little bit below 500, I believe. 2-1 against Detroit. So they start the week against, I think they were a top 3 team on this board, maybe top 5 last week. Win that series, played it very well, and then they fall flat with Chicago White Sox. It seems like Houston is one of those teams right now that is kind of like hot and cold. We see them smash the Blue Jays, and then they fall flat in the weekend. And then we see them beat Detroit and then fall flat in the weekend. I'm not quite sure what's going on. A little bit of inconsistency in this Houston lineup. But at the end of the day, I think they have the pieces and the rotation and the arms to be able to be continuously competitive against anyone on this board. So that does give them a little bit of a notch. Number 11, I think one of the highest moving teams up this board this week. A lot of it has to do with the last 10. They're 8-2. Kansas City 3-0 against Tampa, 2-1 against Baltimore. Kind of cementing to me that the American League Central has surpassed the American League East as a stronger division. Is the West on its way there as well? Well, you're starting to see it. I have the West there as well. So that's kind of starting to be at play here, that I'm starting to lean that those two divisions are going to be the ones to fight for the wild card a little bit more. Is it helping them that they have the bottom teams? It usually does a little bit, but Kansas City seems to be delivering, at least as of late. They had a little bit of a rough start in April, a little middling patch there, but I like the trajectory that they are going. Number 10. The Yankees just don't know really what to say. The offense, the home runs, they're there. And then at times, they're not. The bats get shut down. And then we have outings like Max Fried pitching at a Cy Young caliber level, and then the depth of the rotation just isn't there. They're really missing Garrett Cole. I expect them to make a trade at some point, probably earlier rather than later, to bring in another arm and solidify this rotation. The big thing here, though, they're clearly the strongest team in this division. While it didn't necessarily go their way this week, 1-2 against Baltimore, 1-2 against Tampa, I still think they are the strongest, and they should be able to weather the storm. And they are overall, I think, more deep than the rest of these teams too. So I think on the grand scheme of things, it's going to even out to them winning the division. Next up, Arizona, and they're, I think, hanging on to this top 10 by a thread. I was considering lowering them. They're not record-wise performing very well. The NL West is super stacked. It's going to be tough for them right now. They're solidly in fourth. It's going to be tough for them to make headway in the playoff race with going up against those Giants. But when I started looking at them against the rest of the teams that are below them, I still think Arizona is a better team, and they are going to carry the day more days than not against the rest of those opponents. And this week kind of goes to show it. 2-1 against the Mets, 1-2 against Philly, like 500 week, but it's against two teams that we haven't talked about yet. So I think that's the trouble when we're starting to talk about the National League. It seems to me the National League is much stronger, and we're going to see all that with the way this board is kind of going to play out the rest of the way. Number 8, I have the San Francisco Giants dropping a couple of spots. Not too many, but of course, when you're the third stone in this National League West, and you got Diamondbacks right behind you, it's making for such a strong division. 2 games set they had against the Padres, they got swept, so I'm not going to hold a whole lot in that. It's 2 games. They're going to have many, many more games to sort that out. But then coming into this weekend, they really did bounce back. 3-1 against Colorado. So didn't want to hold too much against them. Just felt like some of the other teams overall, maybe I felt a little bit stronger about just overall. Number 7, Detroit. Detroit is one of those teams, the reason why they don't have the problem that the Giants have in terms of fighting for their division. I think Detroit is the favorite in their division, but as you can see, Royals are trying to close the gap. Cleveland's sniffing. So Detroit was a little bit higher when I thought they were pretty much clear favorites for the division, but it's starting to get a little bit more compact here. Detroit goes 1-2 against Houston. Talked about that series, not too much more to add to that. I like to see a team when they do lose a series, when they play the Angels, they go 3-1, and we saw some massive offense coming from Detroit in that series. And with the pitchers they have, they're not going to be the kind of team that really puts together too long of losing streaks, especially in the American League. Number 6, getting back into the top row after a little bit of a fall. Wanted to get on. We saw the offense really come alive this week for Philly. 2-1 against Washington, 2-1 against Arizona. So no sweeps, and that seems to be the story with Philly. They don't really seem to be pulling out sweeps too often, so that really makes it difficult when teams are putting on too big of winning streaks. It almost seems like they're the kind of team that is just waiting. But again, it's talking about a tough Washington team I talked about earlier that just always playing teams tough, always not an easy win. Washington doesn't like to get swept too much either. And then playing Arizona, it's like bad. Those two teams have battled so many times. Number 5, moving up. This quite possibly might be an all-time high for Seattle since I've been doing this. 6 years now? At number 5, 2-0 against the Angels, 2-1 against Texas. It's not really a week that you can pull a lot of analysis out of. 5-game weeks are always tough to really decide where I should move a team for. But for me, it put them to be the top American League team. Yeah, the top American League team is at number 5. The rotation has been delivering. The division, going 4-1 in a division like this, Texas is struggling. Seems like the Athletics are going to be the team to challenge. And right now I have Seattle as kind of light years ahead of that team. And when we're talking about overall team, the offense is coming together, maybe, finally, for Seattle. So we're going to hold on our judgment, of course. We're going to see more games next week. Will they be able to keep it going? Sometimes I like to curse teams by putting them up on the board and they just immediately fall flat. Number 4, I have the Chicago Cubs. They seem to me to cement the Central this week. It was one of those going in against Milwaukee this weekend, kind of asserting their dominance on the road in Milwaukee. Falling today, so it wasn't like a complete explosion, But so far, the Cubs, the offense has just been one that you're pretty excited about if you're a Cubs fan. On top of that, they do win against Pittsburgh 2-1, so not finding a sweep there either. 4-2 in their division. Would love to see 5-1 if you're a Cubs fan, or 6-0, I'm sure. But still, a lot of credit to the Cubs. Next up, number 3. They were at number 1 last week. Little bit of a stumble, I think. Monday, they came out firing after what Sunday was a little bit ugly against Washington. So came out firing, put up that 19 runs. Then they go 1-2 against Arizona, 1-1 against St. Louis so far. So like not exactly something that really should dethrone you. It's just the fact that, in my opinion, these top 2 teams just demonstrated that they deserve to be there just that little bit more. And at number 2, coming off a sweep. So the Padres, if you watch this channel religiously, the Padres were number 1 on my board for 2 weeks in a row. And then they had a kind of rough week last week. I think it was 1-5 week, including getting swept on the weekend by the Tampa Bay Rays. But then they answered back in a big way. 5 games this week, going 5-0, 2-0 against San Fran. Kind of cementing. San Fran was number 6 and they were number 5 last week. So kind of cementing that, okay, they're here. 2 games, not much. But then Pittsburgh, I like seeing that. Not a lot of offense in the Pittsburgh series in the first couple games either. But the pitching has been, I think, coming into this year, the biggest surprise on the Padres for me. And that's what's elevated them to number 2 on the board. And back at number 1, maybe I should never have dropped them down from number 1, honestly. Back at number 1, they're on a 7-game win streak, maybe 8-game win streak. But the Dodgers, I kept saying when I dropped them down that it was the pitching I was concerned about. But when I'm saying that, I'm not giving them enough credit for what this offense is capable of. We've seen many double-digit scoring games so far this season, especially in this past week. Just absolutely smashing the ball. Top of this lineup is unmatched across the league, let's be honest. Dodgers coming in and making a case for the 100-win that I'm on. And there you guys have it. Let me know what you guys think. Where would you change, and like where am I just completely wrong on? Let me know. I'm interested in some situations. One, if you're a Houston fan, leave me a comment. What's going on there? Because they just seem so hot and cold. Maybe you can give me a little bit better insight. Or if I'm a little bit off on the team that you watch a little more religiously than me, of course, there's 30 teams here. I can't watch every single game. I'm a big box score guy, but sometimes you don't get the entire story from the box score. So let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and we'll see you for that next video.